Hi, guys.
Hi. Hi, Benjamin.
Yep, that's my name. Benjamin Sharp. I hope this isn't too dark for a love thing, but it's what I wrote. Amy, 7 years old when I was born. She took care of me when I was young. My mom was checked out on pills to ease the pressure of being a good young Mormon mother. My dad was always at work. Always. He would be gone for 3 days at a time writing programs for living room-sized computers, using punch cards to organize actuarial tables and maybe to justify staying away from home. My big sister. She had a job when she was 12 and spent most of her time with her friends. She moved out of the house as soon as she could. I think she was 13. She was basically mom, but we were never really close. A lifetime later, after my near suicide by whiskey, let's be honest, it started with whiskey, but it ended with the cheapest vodka. Somehow I got sober. How I did this is a mystery. The short story is I asked a God I didn't believe in for help, and I got help. That'll fuck with you. There's a lot more I want to say about that, but this isn't the time or the place. I hadn't seen my sister, hadn't really been in touch with her at all for almost 30 years. I left Seattle where I'd been living and came back to Utah. And we became drinking buddies for a brief time before I finally stopped in 2018. She had broken her hip in a drunken fall, and I would come by and help out with the dogs, Max and Charlie, taking the garbage out, mowing the lawn. Her husband had died a few years before, so she had this big house to herself. I was living with my dad, my brother, and my alcoholic wreck of an uncle in a very tiny, dreary condominium. So when she suggested that I move in, I didn't need much persuasion. My hope was that I could be a good example to her and maybe she would quit drinking. At the very least, I could maybe be useful. Something I could never do drunk. Now, I couldn't diagnose her as an alcoholic, but I figured 2/5 of Barton's a day probably wasn't great. That's how I drank too, so I got it. We lived together for 2 years. At first, I tried to talk her into getting sober, thinking I could change her mind about things with logical arguments and persuasion. A hypocrite, I judged her. Once I stood behind her car, she was getting ready to drive to the liquor store, threatening to call the cops because she was drunk. You just got out of the hospital. You can't drink. She stared straight into my eyes. Oh, I can drink. I drove a wedge between us. She tried to quit several times, fits and starts. She was too proud to ask for help. It just got worse. There were regular, near-monthly trips to the hospital, a bloody nose that wouldn't stop, more broken bones. Her license got suspended when she got arrested in her own driveway, so I added chauffeuring to my list of duties. There were moments where it seemed she really wanted to stop, but she was very proud and very stubborn. She wanted to do things her way. I believe that's what finally killed her. At some point, something in me softened. I dropped the judgment. I stopped trying to stop her. I did not question or lecture. She was headstrong and determined. She was able to stop drinking the hard stuff and switch to beer. I was impressed. It was more willpower than I ever had. I went the other direction. That beer stopped working. It was this, what is it, Kamchatka? Something like that. I don't know. It's $3.50. She would go to meetings with me occasionally. She even got a sponsor. That didn't last long. So we finally became close for the first time. I was able to be there for her as a brother, and I just tried to be helpful. We laughed a lot. She often told me how grateful she was to have me around and that I was a wonderful roommate. Go figure. She told me she was glad to have me in her life again. It got really bad towards the end. It's difficult to describe because I want to be respectful to her, but I feel it's important to be honest about what it was like. She just wasn't herself anymore. Her mind was going. When she'd walk, she'd shuffle like a zombie. Her speech was slow and simple. Often she couldn't make it to the bathroom quickly enough. I can't imagine how such a once proud woman felt having her younger brother have to clean her up. I came home one night to find Max, the dog, had fallen on the floor. He does this sometimes. He can't get up because he's old, slips on the wooden floor. There was shit everywhere, and it wasn't his. I think my sister tried to pick him up when he fell, and she just lost control of her bowels when she tried to pick him up. It looked like a goddamn murder scene. Max was covered. There were no words. I just grabbed a bucket with warm water and a rag and got to work. The day she went to the hospital for the last time, she'd been crying out. This had been going on for 2 days. She just, ah! Ah! What is going on in there? It was weird. It was like it wasn't like she was in pain. It was more like a little kid who's forgotten what they're crying about, but they know there's something that they should be crying about. And I go in there, I'm like, what's the matter? Why are you yelling? Are you in pain? And she just stared back at me, faking. She hadn't been able to walk without screaming out in pain, so I was baffled when I found her trying to walk through the front door with her walker. Not trying to open the front door. She was trying to walk through it like a ghost. What are you trying to do? Amy, where are you what are you doing? The first words she'd spoken in 3 days. I want to go home. You're home, I thought. No. You want to go home. Chills up my spine. She died in the hospital on November 20th, 2021. An alcoholic death. Everything failed. Liver, kidneys, pancreas, fluid in the lungs. The grief process for me has been long and drawn out. It's been going on for 2 years. I've watched the slow and inevitable decline. The 2 a.m. phone call from the hospital was just the sad period at the end of a sentence. Not a surprise, but a shock nonetheless. Kali, Dark Mother, Eater of Worlds, Scythe, Scimitar, and Trishula. Piss, shit, and vomit are simply colors on her palette. A bucket and a sponge soak this residue of a troubled life to loosen the caked-on filth from the hardwood. The floor where the old dog slips in a puddle of feces, not his, where she couldn't make it to the bathroom on time. Max falls and goes, all Bambi legs and baby-like, his white expressive eyebrows against his black fur, macaroni shapes dancing on his old man dog face, frightened, helpless, until I put my arms under his belly and hoist him up. His legs under him once more. He seems to act like nothing happened, a little embarrassed maybe. He used a spatula to scrape the larger pieces. It's been sitting a while. A macabre late night cooking show demonstration. How to prepare a shit omelet. I'm trying to find something funny in this. with a straight face and a heart full of sadness, but peaceful. Terrible mother, dark blue night, destroyer of ego, its violently severed head in one hand. This idea of self that would gladly kill you if it didn't need you to exist. Life draining from its neck, her terrible expression, blood-stained teeth are bared in a grimace, as though she finds this hilarious. Her skirt is made of lopped-off arms. She wears a necklace of skulls, and yet I am not afraid of her, for she loves her children. She loves the childlike as she kills, mercifully. Sometimes we have to die, but we all sober up eventually. Sometimes love means calmly cleaning up the shit.